As of yesterday, I'm the interim chancellor at UIC. Very delighted to hold that honor, and one privilege that comes with that honor is the ability to be here today and welcome all of you to the discussion that we're going to have. I am Eric Isselson. It's an honor to be joined by the candidates for Chicago's upcoming mayoral election. On behalf of the campus, I thank Professor Robert Bruno, who was on the mic just a minute ago. He is with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign Center for Work Studies. I'd also like to introduce the UIC undergraduate student government and its president, Jacob Schultz, for hosting this event. Jacob, please stand up. Jacob has been a wonderful undergraduate student government president, and I'm kind of disappointed he's going to be graduating in June. As Chicago's largest university and the city's 15th largest employer, UIC is the ideal venue to hold this forum. We serve 28,000 students. We're one of the most diverse campus communities in the country, and our diversity reflects the vibrant demographics of our home city, Chicago. It's a particularly proud moment that one of our members on the panel today is a University of Illinois alumnus, and that is Chicago Alderman Bob Fioretti. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, our sister campus. I'd also like to welcome our other two candidates. First of all, Chicago activist William Doc Walls III, and Chicago businessman Dr. Willie Wilson. And now let me say a word or two about your moderator, Bob Bruno. Robert Bruno is Professor of Labor and Employment Relations, and as I mentioned earlier, the director of the UIUC Labor Education Program, and he's also co-chair of the Chicago Working Class Studies. Bob Bruno has written numerous articles on labor relations, as well as reports on public policy impacting workers in Illinois, and he's published 3 books on related subjects. He's currently working on a book about educational policy and the 2012 Chicago teachers strike. I do apologize that I have another meeting at 1:30. I will have to leave, but could you please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Robert Bruno.
We're pleased to have with us today on the campus. We have 3 of the mayoral candidates. We did extend invitations to Mayor Emanuel and to Commissioner Garcia. Mayor Emanuel did notify us some time ago that he had a scheduling conflict and would not be able to attend. We were under the impression that Mr. Garcia would be here, but early this morning we received a notice that his schedule had changed and that he unfortunately would have to decline the invitation. However, we in fact do have 3 candidates, and we expect them to have a little bit more time to expand upon their views and their visions for Chicago. And I will not get into their deep resumes. You know them, or you can Google them at websites. But we have, as Dr. Gislin noted, one of our alumni, 2nd Ward Alderman Robert Fioretti, who joins us today, William Doc Wallace, and Dr. Willie Wilson. And we thank them for being here to talk about working people on what is a working class campus. Before laying out how we're going to proceed, let me just take 1 minute to explain that unlike the debates that the candidates have agreed to, and I believe there's 5 at last count, this is not a debate. This is a forum. And while these 2 words can appear synonymous, there is an important distinction. And let me just explain that. Forums are discussions, conversations, to share viewpoints, discuss alternative ideas, and if we're all fortunate, to rise up creative and divergent perspectives. Debate, however, includes an attempt to convince others of the correctness of a singular view by opposing and pointing out the incorrect positions of others. Today, we hope to be tough on the issues and gentle on each other. Genuine debates have winners and losers, but good conversations elicit rational thinking that can inspire genuine problem solving for everyone. So, together, let's try and influence the direction of this campaign by agreeing to a vibrant conversation. Now, helping to initiate our discussion is a panel of 3 distinguished individuals who will pose questions to the candidates for roughly 35, 40 minutes. I will attempt to control that time frame. We encourage the candidates to respond to all of the questions. And the 3 panelists, let me introduce them, and we'll start here on my immediate right. Co-chair of Chicago Jobs with Justice Clergy Committee, Dr. Calvin Morris. Sitting next to Dr. Morris, my colleague at the Labor and Employment Relations School at the University of Illinois, Professor Stephen Ashby, who is also working with me on the book project having to do with the Chicago teachers strike. And then on the far right, we're so pleased to have the senior policy analyst at the Better Government Association, Alden Lowry. Following the panel segment, we'll then open the floor to questions from the audience, and my role will be to moderate, move the discussion forward, rigorously enforce time limits, call on audience members. All right, before we turn to the panels to ask some questions, we've asked the candidates to prepare no more than a 5-minute opening statement. This is where I get to enforce those strict time limits by telling mayoral candidates, you have to stop now. But I'm looking forward to their opening comments. So, Robert, perhaps you should step up first. Closest to the mic, merely chance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I do want to thank the panel, too, everyone for coming out, both other candidates. We're going to have some fun, especially on this issue, but it's not a fun issue. To our student body president, I, too, was student body president at U of I. And I have to tell you just one little story, just between us, and so nobody else will listen. I had the opportunity to represent all Big Ten universities and call for the president's resignation. And about 10 days later, the President of the United States did resign pursuant to what we requested. So we were pretty effective at that point. So I hope you could do the same job all the way through. You know, and I do want to thank Working Class Studies, too, because I think this is important. You know, first of all, I do want to say when I ran for alderman in '07, I got into the race because I read a Tribune article that was very disturbing in '06. And it talked about 6 out of every 100 African-American kids made it through college. And I thought that number was unacceptable. And so I wanted to run, make a difference, see what I can do. I was lucky to have the Second War, the historic Second War, 40 schools. And I saw what can happen between 40 different schools. And income inequality is a major issue that we have to deal with in our school system, too. And it's really the pervasive issue that affects crime, economic development, and our fiscal health and where we're going in this city. You know, everyone knows that Chicago's in a financial trouble. And as it's been reported across the country, across the world, but many people, and everybody talks about a way to fix things. Today I've had the pleasure of talking to people who care and understand about the problems, and you are the people who care and understand about those problems. Just this morning, I rolled out an economic program on the West Side to deal with the issues on how we stimulate our economy, how we create job growth. And Chicago is at an important crossroads. We have an opportunity to create a thriving economy, one that benefits all Chicagoans, but it requires us to establish clear priorities on how we invest or reinvest our resources. One of the biggest issues in facing all Chicagoans is having access to jobs and careers that provide wages to sustain families. While a minimum wage of $15 an hour is paramount, a highly skilled workforce is the best way to ensure long-term prosperity. That is why we need to focus on a robust economy, an agenda that lifts our workers, creates opportunities for everyone to thrive, not just major corporations here in this city. We need an economy that lifts our people in all neighborhoods rather than builds glass castles in the downtown Loop area. This means expanding vocational education programs in our neighborhood public schools And I have repeatedly, and in fact I have a resolution pending, calling for the expansion of vocational education programs in the Chicago public schools. So our children have the ability to choose what are the best opportunities for their future. So where do we start? First of all, we need an entirely new set of priorities to benefit our economy and working class families. You've all heard of TIFs, and it stands for tax increment financing. And no, you're really not meant to understand what they are, which means they aren't benefiting you. These are programs that were set up to attract certain businesses and investments in blighted areas, but they become anything but. The tax base that is meant to support our most essential services is being gobbled up by companies in the forms of tax breaks, which are overkill in most cases. I want to do a complete audit of our programs, as well as other city finances, and declare any surplus and any monies that's available, that's not obligated to a certain project, to go back into our neighborhoods. We want to take that money, develop programs that will help working class families in all neighborhoods throughout this city. I want vocational and job skill programs for people so that they can be trained in industries that are growing and pay living wages. I will use the surplus to create programs that will help small businesses, owners, entrepreneurs with services, microfinance, and guidance in areas that might need help. I will use it to develop business-friendly zones in our communities so that they can thrive commerce all across our cities, not just downtown. Of course, we can't have a thriving business district without safety and basic issues, basic services. So I will make sure that we surplus and reopen our mental health clinics that would help prevent crime and homelessness. I will reinvest in our neighborhood schools because a good education leads to good jobs, and good jobs create strong neighborhoods to reduce crime. I will use the money and savings that we can get on our police overtime to hire lots of police officers who reflect our neighborhoods and are skilled in community policing and building good relations. I've said it many times, and I'll say it again. The solutions to our problems in this city involve a holistic approach to three basic elements. One, providing good education. Two, making our streets safe and our neighborhoods safer. And three, creating a strong economy that benefits everyone. Under 5 minutes?
You did really good.
Thank you.
Thank you. At University of Illinois Education, put the work really well there, right on time, fantastic. Dr. Walls, if you would come up and give us, Doc Walls, I'm sorry.
I'm a juris doctor. I have a law degree, but
Okay.
I'm not a doctor. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Doc Walls. I was born and raised in Chicago. I graduated Horace Mann Elementary, Chicago Vocational High School, Tuskegee University, and IIT Chicago Kent College of Law. Back in 1982, when Harold Washington announced his candidacy for mayor, every fiber of my being stood up, and I knew I had to get involved. Chicago was going through some tumultuous times. Lou Palmer had said, "We shall see in '83. There were promises made, but we weren't moving forward towards that. But finally, when Harold announced his candidacy, we knew there was hope. Hope for the people of the city of Chicago who were being put upon by the evil cabal, which is symbolized by Ed Swibell, Ed Verdoliak, and Jane Byrne. They were taking advantage of the people, particularly through the Chicago housing authorities. And people were suffering in Chicago. So I got involved. I helped to organize the Lawyers Committee for Harold Washington, served as president of law students for Harold Washington, served as his assistant scheduler, and then became his direct assistant. Back in 1984, when the Sun-Times evaluated the Jane Byrne administration key cabinet members versus the Harold Washington key cabinet members, they said Byrne had no top aide as talented as Bill Walls. And that was my cornerstone, that was my mark. I've been actively involved in Chicago politics, I've been actively involved in Chicago politics because I know it's a long, protracted struggle. It is not one and done. We have to make certain that we restore Chicago city government to the people who need it most. And I'm the candidate with the vision who's capable of doing that, making Chicago one city. We have two Chicagos. We have a world-class Chicago and we have an underclass Chicago. That world-class Chicago is beautiful, safe, tourist-friendly, robust, full of resources, and unlimited opportunity for the privileged few. It's a playground for Rahm Emanuel, excuse me, and the other 1% who have money, riches, connections, and clout. And then there's that underclass Chicago, the Chicago that the mayor and the media would rather ignore and not talk about. Decaying neighborhoods, unsafe streets, people driving and dodging potholes, and children walking to school dodging bullets. That's the reality. Inferior city services, trigger-happy police, no jobs, no schools, no parks, no economic development. Slumlords, food deserts, red light cameras, blue light cameras, speed zone cameras, people being policed to the nth degree. That's not the Chicago that I envision. I envision a Chicago where we unify and involve everybody, every race, creed, color, every ethnicity. People in the city of Chicago should have equal opportunity. And that's what I pledge. I was a member of UAW, a union member. So I understand the importance of unions and the way that they play into the lives of working class people. I also understand that Chicago hasn't had an industry to call its own since the demise of the stockyards. We got too fancy. We said, not in our backyard. We can't stand the smell. So they closed down the stockyards and they built the steel mills in Indiana. Excuse me. And everybody went to work in the steel mills. And then they closed those steel mills because China took that business. And now we have no industry to call our own. New York has Broadway. They have Wall Street. California has film and television. Detroit, a city that's bankrupt, has the automotive industry. We have none. But we have small businesses all across the city of Chicago where working men and women have pooled their resources and decided that they want to create a legacy for their children and their children's children, but they don't get the support they need. So one of my major initiatives, excuse me one more time. One of my major initiatives is a program which would be dependent upon our capital improvement program. Now there's a capital improvement program in the city of Chicago, $7.9 billion. Thank you. That water should be very helpful. Thank you. $7.9 billion. And capital improvement has 4 areas of concentration: economic development, transportation, education, and infrastructure improvement. Typically, the mayors in the city of Chicago use all of that money for infrastructure improvement and ignore the other components. Well, what I'd like to do is take $1 billion of that $7.9 billion, leaving $6.9 billion for road building, and invest in the small businesses in Chicago. We have no industry, but they are our greatest hope for evaluating and finding an industry that we can call our own in this technologically savvy age. There's no way in the world we can go into the 22nd century the way we came out of the 20th. We will identify 1,000 small to medium-sized businesses, industry and geographic diverse, all across the city of Chicago. Those small businesses that have stood by us through wind, rain, storm, and proven that they love Chicago and that all they want is an opportunity to employ their neighbors and the people who live nearby. We'll give them a grant of $1 million each. And I didn't say a loan, I said a grant. These are qualified businesses. We won't just go hand them $1 million check so they can go buy a Cadillac. We will give it to them in measured steps as they prove that they're capable of creating jobs. With that $1 million, we'll expect that each one of them will be able to create 50 jobs. 50 jobs in the city of Chicago, created by 1,000 companies. That's 50,000 jobs. And we'll talk more about that as we proceed.
And finally, Dr. Willie Wilson.
Good morning. Okay, well, it's afternoon, whatever day it is. I'm still here. Well, listen, let me say this. Let me thank the Lord for his amazing grace and his unspeakable gift. I'm Dr. Willie Wilson, and tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll take the question. I'm not a politician. I'm a business person. I have a 7th grade education. Never been back to school. I'm a successful business person. I have a national, international company that does about $6 million a year in business. And I don't try to be something that I'm not. I'm a human being. I share your feeling. I pick cotton, I chop cotton. I make 20 cents per hour. I never left the community when I was successful. And as a business person, we give away over $1 million a year to our churches and different organizations here in Chicago and around the country. My wife and I, we do not accept any outside money from anybody unless they going to give it unconditionally. We, in this campaign, we have financed our own campaign up to this far. 99.99% I've done it myself. And I did that because I don't want nobody to think that they own me or buy me. I'm here for the people. I will not take a salary from the city of Chicago. If I do take one, I'll give it away to charity. I'm not gonna try to be something I'm not. I'm gonna help people. And that's what I was born to do, is to help others. I'm tired of the 50 schools being closed in the city of Chicago that affect our people. It affects a generation in certain urban areas that have been struggling for years to try to make a living. It's put us back. But we are a city for all people in the city of Chicago. And so, as I move around this city and I'm gonna say it right now, as your next mayor of this city, I'm gonna win. You know, I have no problem with nobody here, these other 2 candidates. My only problem is Mayor Emanuel, and I would address him only. You know, so I'm running. And so I was sent here through life by Christ. I'm a Christian, and I won't get off that, and I won't change for anybody. You know, and I'll go on and do this. My initial government, the only purpose of government is to help people who can't help themselves. And I'm here to help, and I will help. I'm tired of taxes. We won't raise any taxes. We'll create taxes. The idea is that taxes to burden people who can't pay rent now. I'm tired of it, sick of it. I decided to get off the sideline and do something about it. And so anything they ask me today, you hear from the heart. It won't be no phony. God bless you.
Thank all of you, and I want to underscore that while it's certainly going to be a busy campaign season and all of the candidates will be together in multiple different venues and occasions, while 2 of the candidates are not with us today, this was in fact the first opportunity for all of the candidates to be on the same stage in the same place. To allow you an opportunity to evaluate them. So to the 3 that are here, a special regard and note for getting this started in the right way. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to now turn to our panel, and we're going to begin on the far end with Alden Lowry of the Better Government Association, who will start with the initial question, and then I think we'll just move down the panel to Brother Stephen and Dr. Morris, and then we'll cycle back. Okay? All right, very good.
Thank you, Professor Bruno, and to the folks at USC for inviting me to be a part of the panel. We'll get things started with a question about privatization. Chicagoans vary on a number of different things. Some root for the Cubs, some root for the Sox. But I think one thing that all Chicagoans, or nearly all Chicagoans, root for is no more parking meter deals. What steps would you take as mayor to examine proposals to privatize city assets and services, involve the public in those decisions, and prevent another parking meter deal?
I don't know.
We'll start with you.
Go ahead. Good, you can hear through the mics that we have. First of all, we've had an ordinance pending almost since the third meeting, maybe November of 11, dealing with a robust input from communities on privatization. It hasn't moved. I think we saw a couple weeks ago that the mayor was going to introduce a ordinance to deal with privatization. However, my view is I think we need to take back many of the services that we've had that have been privatized and put them back under the auspices of the city. A lot is happening especially at O'Hare Airport. It's becoming the privatization capital of the world. And we need to draw back what we're doing, look at what we're doing, especially at O'Hare at this point.
Thank you. May I recommend also to the candidates, given the setup here, that you should feel comfortable simply throwing your answers out and looking out at the audience. Maybe a little uncomfortable for you to have to turn and look across.
All right.
Please.
I strictly abhor privatization. I don't believe that it has a place in public government for several reasons. First of all, I believe that a city workforce is responsive and responsible to the people of the city of Chicago. They can be held accountable under a city administration. But when you privatize it, you lose that authority to directly control who gets what, when, where, and how much they pay the employees, and whether or not those employees are unionized, and whether or not those employees are treated fairly. Also, when you privatize, you're giving a city service to someone who's seeking to make a profit. So there's a profit margin attached. When the city itself does the work, there is no profit. Or when a not-for-profit organization does the work, there is no profit. So that money is turned into progress and efficiency and delivery of services for the people of the city of Chicago who need it most. I believe that we ought to have a mandate that if you have a major privatization proposal, that aldermen of the city of Chicago should be given time to review it, and it ought to automatically go to a city council committee for complete evaluation. We shouldn't have deals like that parking meter lease deal, which was sprung on the aldermen overnight, and they were required to vote on it. It's one of the worst things that could have ever happened to the city of Chicago. So we have to be wise when it comes to privatization. The other thing that happens is we have a Shackman exempt law. And that Shackman exempt law says that there's no political hiring and firing. So that means that city employees don't have to do political work for the person that sponsored them or for the person that got their job. The same is not true in private corporations. And oftentimes, those privatized employees are made to do work on behalf of politicians in the city of Chicago, and it avoids the Shackman decree intent.
Doc.
My take is a little bit different. I think that the parking meters should have been done this way. I think it should have been bidded out to the citizen of Chicago. I think that it should have been bidded out in a way that each community in the city of Chicago that represents the city of Chicago should have had an opportunity to own a piece of that particular business. When you take and do things such as that way, the community began to be an economic empowerment within the community itself. I would introduce legislation that says that anybody who does business with the city of Chicago would have to have an equal opportunity, employment-wise and contract-wise, so it would affect every neighborhood, regardless of what color you are, or things of that nature. That way you empower the community itself, and growth began to rise. And as the community rise, so does Chicago rise.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. We're now going to go to Professor Ashby, and I think we'll, in terms of responses, we'll start with Doc Walls.
Well, the new mayor of Chicago is going to face a financial crisis. as is our new governor, as is every new mayor across the country. And the debate seems to often focus on two alternatives. One is to cut social services for working people. And we've had a lot of pushback in the city about cuts in libraries and cuts in mental services. And it certainly seems, if we believe his promises, that Governor Rauner is going to begin by insisting on drastic cuts in services. The other alternative put forward is, well, we need to raise property taxes. We need to raise city or county taxes. We need to find more services to tax. We need to find new things to have fees on, so we don't call them taxes and we don't get blamed for tax increases, or increase the fees on services already being taxed. As some critics would say, the whole red light camera issue is not about safety for our children, but about a hidden tax. A third alternative put forward by a number of the unions in the city say we have to find new areas for income. The National Nurses Union, the Chicago Teachers Union have called for fighting for a graduated state income tax. We're one of a handful of states in the country whose income tax is not graduated but is flat. The National Nurses Union has called, and the CTU have called for a financial transaction tax, a very small tax on those transactions, sometimes called a Robin Hood tax. And a number of unions have called for moving TIF money away from corporations to city services. So on those three options, as I've outlined them anyway, where would you come down? How do you deal with the deficit in the city? How do you fund the new social programs you all want to fund? Where's the money going to come from?
I certainly don't believe that we should cut social services. Social services are here for a reason, because the people of the city of Chicago need those. Our responsibility is to take care of the weak, afflicted, infirmed, and disoriented. We cannot avoid that responsibility. It's ours. I don't believe in more fines, fees, and assessments. I don't think that you can fine and fee your way and tax your way out of the problems that the city of Chicago has. We have a spending problem. We have structural problems. For example, the city of Chicago has a debt service that is $900 million in 2015. Debt service, what does that mean? That's the interest that we have to pay the bankers on the money that we have borrowed for revenue bonds, municipal bonds, and general obligation bonds. So what do I propose? I propose that we transition Chicago from a debt-to-fund services revenue and expenditure system into a pay-as-you-go revenue and expenditure system. Right now, we're doing the equivalent of paying our bills using a credit card. I want to get to the point where we're paying our bills using a debit card with money in the bank. How do we get there? The first thing we do is we take $1.7 billion from that slush fund that's called a TIF fund that's sitting idle, doing absolutely nothing, and we pay down the debt. We then involve more people in the equation in the bidding process. And through that process, and I'll talk about that later in this discussion, but trust me, through that process, the city's going to save $500 million because you're going to have more people bidding. One person will say, I'll do it for $100,000. The next person says, I'll do it for $99,000. The next person says, I'll do it for $98,000, sold to the lowest, most responsive bidder. So we'll use that $500 million that the city saves to help pay down the debt. And then finally, through cost-saving measures that we've identified extensively, we'll save another $600 million. We'll pay into that fund. Over a period of 6 years, we can get to the point where we have in reserve $8.99 billion. So now Chicago is able to fund this on. The only people that would be mad would be the bankers who don't get that $900 million a year. So we have $8.9 billion excuse me, in our budget, but we only get to spend $8 billion because $900 million goes to the bankers. We have to change the way we think, unthink our economics. We can't simply rely on more fines, fees, and assessments.
Thank you. Dr. Walsberg. Dr. Wilson.
Well, here would be my solution. I do not believe taxing people who cannot pay their light bill or real estate taxes. I do not believe in that. I don't believe in taxing big business or small business. Because once you tax business, we pass it on to the consumer. So you're really just taxing the consumers. We have to be creative. My proposal would be simple, would be this, is that we will open back up Mag Field, create new opportunities, new jobs. Contracts and jobs will go to the citizen of Chicago by introducing those legislation equally to the different communities. We will open up a casino. Right now you go to the casino in Indiana and Joliet and those places. You see people with Chicago stickers. Open up those casinos, generate extra revenue. As they generate extra revenue, that's what we all benefit. And on top of that, we will make sure that the casino is owned by the citizens of Chicago. We will make sure that happens. And that way, we don't have to worry about our dollars going some places else. We have to stop talking about moving dollars from over here to over there. It began a shell game. That's all it is. So we would take that approach. We will lower taxes like gasoline taxes. People go to the suburban buy gasoline. If they go to the city and buy gasoline outside of the city, you're running away jobs. Lower your taxes so gasoline taxes will be the same as other cities and suburban. Then that way you'll keep the job within the South. That's what I do as your next mayor.
Thank you. And Alderman, finally.
Thank you. I wish it was as easy as everybody talks about, but it's not going to be that easy. In fact, we're looking at another $500 million obligation that might run as high as $800 million in 2016 that we have to pay. It's not on the books right now. So, and that's to pay for the pension. We were obligated under a 2010 law that was signed by the governor at that time to make sure that we start fully funding our pensions. First of all, I do want to say on the pensions, part of the problem has been that there wasn't money put in by the corresponding governmental unit, meaning the city or CPS or the park district. And we end up demonizing our employees because of it. It's not their fault, it was the government's fault, City Hall's fault. I remember getting on the floor of the city council and I said, you know, we cannot take pension holidays. And the head of the finance chair got up there and said, we were forced to take them. No, we weren't. And if we look at what the TIFs have caused, the TIFs have caused a taking away of the money that should have gone into our general revenue. Now, I'm glad the mayor's listened to what I've said in the past. Let's surplus the TIFs. He did surplus the TIFs to save some of the money to keep teachers. That money went into the teachers. But let's say we have $1 billion that we can surplus. Now, first of all, we're not taking $500 million anymore into the TIFs. It's much lower because we've caused expiration of TIFs. We're doing other things with TIFs. So it's about $400 and some million. Let's just, whatever the number is. If we had $1 billion, what does the city get out of it? $200 million, period. That's all we get. The rest goes all to the other governmental entities. CPS will take more than 50% of it, as we all know. So, now, I have advocated to put on the table financial transaction tax. We do not ask our wealthy corporations to pay their fair share. And yes, the Nurses Association's in favor of it. I sat down with them. But we also know that we'd have to go to Springfield, change the law, number one, and two, possibly go to Congress, change the law nationwide. We are aware of that factor. I've advocated a commuter tax. Those that work in the city and live elsewhere, they live from Hammond, Indiana, which gets all the revenue for the casinos, to Milwaukee, to the few people that drive in from the city, from Dubuque, come in here. 660,000 people come in and work in the city. 1% commuter tax would generate $357 million. The aggregate of those 660,000 people, they make $30 billion a year here in the city, and they spend it in their hometown. They don't spend it here. They spend it for gas there, groceries there, real estate property taxes there. You name it, they spend it there. I would use that to go into paying for the pension fund with the pension obligation bond that I talked about, and I've talked about repeatedly, because I'm not in favor of kicking the can down the road. I also like the idea that, you know, sometimes we can talk about a casino, but we've been fighting over it forever, and yes, it has to be municipal owned, but casinos have their own drawbacks too. In 2010, I finally came out in favor of a casino, and I said it at the City Club speech. And at that time, every mayoral candidate jumped on it and said, that's not a bad idea. We're going to get $600 million. I doubt that. And then we got to figure out what to do. Now, we've got a lot of taxes, and yes, we do have a lot of taxes that have been misdirected and wrong prioritizing. We're now collecting $1.2 billion in the water and sewer tax. It's doubled in 4 years under this administration. And it can only go towards water and sewers. So we need to probably lower that tax or make sure that if we put people in that line our sewers, replace our sewers, paint those fire hydrants, that they're from the city, that they're working from the city. But go look over there and talk to the people who are on those jobs and they're not from the city. That's how we get economic opportunities going. And I think under any other ones, I think we need TIF reform across the board. I think we can find ways to do it. I think we can do a complete overhaul. Real estate property taxes, it's not going to be in the cards. We're still in the middle of a foreclosure crisis here in the city. And in which wards, which areas? South and west side. I said it in '07 when I voted against the budget. And I got up there for the first time to talk about my vote. And I looked at what was happening in '06. '06 we had about 10,400 foreclosures. But in the first 6 months of '07, we had 14,400. I said, damn, we've got a problem. And then I looked at the wards, the 9th Ward, 34th Ward, the West Side wards, all were being hit with foreclosure. I knew something was wrong. Of course, predatory lending and those bundling, of course, which still hasn't been resolved. And let's think about it. When we talk about the bankers, not a single one of them ever went to jail, but they've made millions of dollars, billions of dollars off of what we did, or what they did in our communities. So, and the foreclosure crisis hasn't stopped. You can come to my legal night that I have twice a month, and we got lines of people that were trying to save their houses, and there are ways to do it. So I want to thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll end this first round with a question from Dr. Morris, and Alderman Fioretti, you can reply first to the question.
I think it's Wilson.
Oh,
Mr.
I'm
Wilson.
sorry, Dr. Wilson, that's correct. Well, they're keeping score. They've got it. They've got us in line. Thank you.
My question, I've appreciated the nuts and bolts and your different responses to these profound questions, issues that face the city. I think the question I would ask you is, each of you, what kind of leader do you think is necessary, is needed for the city of Chicago? What is the mayoral leader? What kind of leadership would you bring to all of these different issues, and what would be the quality of that leadership? Whether it has to do with education or police community relations, or a city that calls itself an international city, and we certainly have people here from all over the world. What kind of leader would you be for this kind of very complex urban environment in which we live?
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, please.
I would be the kind of leader that I am today. I would take then consult with the people all citizens of the city of Chicago before I make a decision. I would give back to the city, and I would make sure that the city is branded, that when contracts comes out, that it is bidded fairly. I would make sure that all citizens would make sure that they are included, not excluded. I would make sure not to have relatives in a situation where that they receive contract over and over again. I would make sure that I wouldn't close down 50 schools unless I consult with the community. I would make sure that we'll put trade back in school. So when the kids get out of school in terms of diplomacy, they have something, a trade that they can go in their own businesses. And they'll be good citizens. As related to crime, crime always will be here unless you can bring economic empowerment and growth within the community. You have to do something about that. But to start out with, I would make sure I would fire the superintendent of police. First thing I would do as your mayor. I would also hire 4 other superintendent of police. That way you can get closer to the community. I would take 75% of them out of their cars so they can ride the L, the subway, and walk up and down the street. Be closer to the people. How would you pay for it? You don't have to buy all those automobiles, gasoline, fix maintenance of it. And I would make sure that I would set up a citizen group independently that would oversee it with a separate police force that be independent of the police force itself. They'll report direct to me, so if something happens, a 911 call goes out. We don't have no problem like Ferguson or the I can't breathe situation. To help protect the citizen, to make sure they feel safe in an environment that all Chicago citizens deserve. That's what kind of leader I would be to you.
Alderman, why don't we let you?
Well, I think I'd sum it up in maybe 3 words: tough and fair. Or maybe the Boy Scout oath, motto: Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent.
Wow.
So, and I say that, but I think I was elected in a historic black second ward. And unfortunately, the remap blew it all apart. All those aldermen that voted for it should be voted out. Mm-hmm. And taking a ward that was 76% African American, that was the first non-black that was elected since 1915. I'm going to use the same procedure that I would do. I would have ward nights in the communities, because you got to listen to the people. I have ward nights too, alongside our legal night. But I'll give you a demonstration, and we have community events often. We have community input, and we get to places. I mean, I've created 5 new parks in the ward. I have massive projects that have created employment, that have hired from our communities, whether they're the Rush, Target, Costco, projects that make sure that we have livable wages for everybody. But more importantly, I think you need to be inclusive of who and what the community is, and go back to the drawing board sometimes on programs and policies, because you have to include the community. They need to shape the policies. You can be a leader or a follower, and when you can follow the community, and I'm not sure that's what we want sometimes, because if I look across this city and I look across what I see, I think everybody in this room ought to be just upset. There are 2 Chicagoans. You need to be a leader that's going to bring the same kind of resources into our communities across the board. Whether it's at 119th and Halsted or 128th and Emerald, that's down at State and Madison. I did that when I was alderman. I made sure every part of my ward had infrastructure across the board. I'm going to do that when I'm here.
I'm a visionary. I don't see things the way my opponents see things. I see a Chicago that is robust, a Chicago that is built around not an austerity government, but a prosperity government, one where everybody has what they need, more like Beverly Hills 90210 than Detroit. It's up to us to determine what we want for Chicago. Do we want business as usual, the same old things done, warmed over a slightly different way? Or do we want not drastic changes, but transitions, smooth transitions into a new way of doing business? We talk about fines, and we talk about fees, and we talk about assessments, and we talk about more taxes. Those things have been floating forever. The programs that I talk about, you don't have to go to Springfield to get them done. You don't have to go to Washington, D.C. to get them done. You don't have to go to the city council to get them done. When I talk about the capital improvement program, it's $7.9 billion. That money is there, pre-approved by the city council for spending at the mayor's discretion. It's a 6-year program. So those are things that we can actually do immediately upon taking office. We have to unify the city by promoting cultural and diversity sensitivity amongst people of all ages, races, socioeconomic backgrounds, all religious persuasions, all sexual orientations, all physical and mental disabilities or limitations, because none of us is any better than the rest of us. And we're all inextricably intertwined. That's not the Chicago that we have under Rahm Emanuel. It's about big business first. We have to provide a superior public school education for each and every individual child. And that transcends the development of modern buildings with state-of-the-art equipment and facilities which are conducive to safe and potentially productive educational environments. We certainly have to teach our children, excuse me, can I have a minute? Cough drop. Reading, writing, math, and science. But we also have to teach them to follow their hearts, their minds, their talents. We have to teach our children the humanities, the arts, languages. We have to teach them civics. We have to teach them vocations so that they can, thank you, baby. This is my wife, Pamela. We have to teach them vocations so they can go out and make a living. We have to teach our children music and art so they have an appreciation for society and humanity. We have to have a police department that's responsive to the needs of the people. We have to have policies, practices, and procedures in place, certainly. But we have to have a police department that's reflective of the entire city of Chicago, Black, white, Latino, and Asian. Those are the things that I bring to the table as a mayor because I'm committed to that, always have been, and always will be. We have to stop finding new taxes and figure out ways to make what we have work for us, because we have excess. We just have a spending problem, and we spend it on the wrong people in the wrong areas on the wrong programs. So we need a visionary mayor, and that's the kind of mayor that I would be in the city of Chicago.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start a second round, and as we do this, I want to encourage the candidates to perhaps make slightly briefer responses so that we can allow some additional questions. I know that's a hard thing. You've got a lot to say.
We can do it.
That's my job to make that point. Let's go back to Holden, please.
Thanks, Professor Bruno. This is an issue that flies under the radar some, but I think it's important to make mention, particularly in a forum about working people. One of the most powerful weapons that working people have at their disposal, which I don't think many people are aware of, is something called the Freedom of Information Act. It's something that is utilized heavily by members of the media, by government watchdog groups, and by some citizens. But essentially, in a nutshell, the law says that records that are owned and maintained by the government are actually open to the people. And save for a few exceptions, the people have the right to that information. They can request it under this law, and it has to be turned over in a manner of time, and the policies as are part of the law. However, as a journalist and now an employee of a government watchdog group, familiar with FOIA, as it's called, and talking with others who have used the law frequently, the city government in Chicago has developed a reputation for not complying with the law very often, particularly a few distinct agencies. The BGA, in fact, has sued several city agencies for non-compliance with the FOIA, schools, police, CTA, animal care and control, and a few others. How would you address what some call a culture of FOIA non-compliance within city government?
I think that's, I don't know what there is to hide so much in city government. And we've seen it over and over again. And probably every story that the Tribune now writes about that affects the city they've had to go to court under the FOIA to get the releases of the documents that are necessary. I think we just need to open them up. Look at the few exceptions that have been crafted by the legislature in Springfield, because I think there is some validity to them, and go forward and just open them up. Because I think knowledge is power, and that's important for the city. People need to know how decisions are being made. I think the most unfortunate thing about this city council is that we very seldom have quorums at most of our council committee meetings. And if you're if we have a committee that's in the council chambers, I guarantee none of you would be able to get on the floor. But if you're a lobbyist, you're able to get on the floor and talk to a committee member. We have to reform the whole structure of what we're doing in our city council. And you know, lobbyists and big money are controlling, and FOIA should be our opening for what the city is, instead of protecting that big money which is intruding into government.
The Freedom of Information Act was intended to protect our democracy, because bad things happen in secret in those smoke-filled rooms. I love for the public to know exactly what happened and how it happened and why it happened. So I certainly, as mayor of the city of Chicago, would encourage every single department head to cooperate with FOIA requests as speedily as possible. Additionally, I believe that people need to know how decisions were made. So one of the things that I've proposed as part of my ethics program is that the mayor's cabinet meetings will be recorded and broadcast, so people see ideas from their conception and know the reason and the rationale and the intent behind it. I believe that we should have transparency, absolute transparency in government. Everything that happens in City Hall should be public. It's a public building paid for with your public tax dollars. So the FOIA request will certainly be honored by my administration, and it will tie that into the need to continue our democracy.
Thank you. And Dr. Wilson.
Mine would be just simple. When you hide something, don't want people to come in and take a look. That means you're hiding something. I would institute, as your mayor, a board that the citizen will select to do a quarterly investigation on all books for the city of Chicago. It'd be mandated that we would have to put everything on the website that we do open. There shouldn't be nothing should be hidden with your taxpayer dollars. Just an open book. And that's what I would do as your mayor.
Thank you very much. Stephen.
In the reviews of the film Selma, defenders of President Johnson have argued he was treated unfairly and that he actually called for the march on Selma and is not given enough credit for the passing of the Voting Rights Act. Defenders of the film argue that this is a misreading of history, that the law would not have been passed without him. But all the gains of the civil rights movement came from the mass protests and the mass civil disobedience, and the people, as we saw in the film Selma, being beaten and arrested over and over and over again. So I guess my question for you is, what is your view of the role of the people the day after you're elected? Mother Jones, a labor activist a century ago, famously said when workers were killed on picket lines, "Don't mourn, organize." So one view would be, which I think is the answer of most mayors across the city, the role of the people of the day after I'm elected is to go home. Watch the news, read the paper, maybe write a letter to the editor. Another view, as in the film Selma and Martin Luther King, would be no social change occurs without the people organizing for it, particularly in these terrible times with income inequality growing, poverty growing. So what is your view of how social change occurs?
It's interesting. I have a book. It's called When Courage Is Not Enough. And When Courage Is Not Enough chronicles the original migration out of Africa nation creation, colonization, immigration, power politics, and the quest for world domination. Ultimately, the theme is the way that we abdicate our freedoms in the name of safety, and that's what's happening today. And I deal with Lyndon Baines Johnson and Martin Luther King and their relationship, the fact that they had a coalition of convenience, and it was mutually respectful, but it was productive in every single way. So I haven't seen the movie Selma, but I look forward to seeing that. The people of the city of Chicago have a responsibility to be involved in government on a day-to-day basis. Certainly you elect your aldermen who are closer to you, and they're supposed to do your bidding, but you have to hold your aldermen accountable. And as we progress and move forward using technology and providing that transparency, it'll be a whole lot easier to do that, because you'll know just what your aldermen did, and you'll know what they said on the city council floor, so you can then hold them accountable and put pressure on them when necessary. But you also have to put pressure on the mayor. You get the government you fight for. You get the government you deserve. We want people to engage in government. We believe that there ought to be open hearings around issues like the budget, major issues in Chicago. So we believe that people ought to show up, and there ought to be standing room only. That's how it was when Daley actually had budget hearings. People were engaged, and they wanted to be a part of it. But now, people are giving up that responsibility. It is our responsibility if we want to remain free.
Well, I think that you have to keep people involved into government. You know, people must be allowed to vote. They're voting, and people must run for office to get involved, keep them part of the process. Dr. King died fighting for all of us, white, black, color, you name it, because there was more than just African American that died. You had white and others that believe in the same way. Just as it is today with the I Can't Breathe situation in Ferguson, more than just black death. You have to look at the fact that, like today, I give you a typical example. 3 weeks ago, this mayor, Mayor Emanuel, tried to disenfranchise 47,000 signature that petition to keep me off the ballot. We fought it. I forgot about how to run for mayor. 47,000 people, citizens, was what Dr. King, Rosa Parks, and fought for. I spent the money. I spent over $100,000. In this day, 2015, to be on the ballot. This day. I'm 2 generations from slavery. For me to fight it in 2015, as I had to do, spend over $100,000 of my money to get on a petition, is a shame to all of us as citizens.
I think I've said it before. I'm not the mayor. We are going to be the mayor. And the elevator, as that door opens up on the 5th floor, it's for everybody. It's not just for the few, not for the favored donors, not for the corporate tax break people that come up there. And quite frankly, ward nights get to be long and trying. But you have to roll up your sleeves to deal with the inclusionary value of what it means to be involved in this city and in every ward. We have 72, 73 communities here. And when we created the parks, I had multiple meetings over and diagrams, and we used each and every one. Those of you that are familiar with Mary Bartlemay Park, right past on Adams and a block away from Greektown, have seen an award-winning park that was fashioned from all the people. Fred Anderson Park, which just opened up, which is, and I had to deal with the Park District Wednesday with it. Same thing, multiple meetings. We created a park right on the other side of, Western, Campbell, Jackson, Adams, that area. Multiple meetings with all of the CHA folks and what we were going to do. Same thing on over at the Diablo Homes. You know, sometimes everybody, it's from the top down, it just doesn't work. And that's where we have this distrust, this dissatisfaction, this ill at ease. Embrace the people, have them come in, because it's their money, it's their dollars, it's their city. And collectively, it's our city.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Morrison.
One of the deepest issues facing the city is the issue of education. Many of our children are not getting educated for a future. We presently have about 25% unemployment in certain neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. Many of them are minority neighborhoods, or practically all of them. We have issues around public schools, charter schools, whether we should have an elective school board. There are some people who believe that perhaps if we had had an elected school board, we would not have had 50 schools closed in the manner that they were. Where do you stand on this issue of education, this issue of public charter schools, this issues of an elected school board?
Well, I would stand this way. First of all, we should have an elected school board. When you don't have an elected school board, you appoint someone, you're doing that for a reason, to control the contracts and things. Case in point, I forget the lady's name right now, but the mayor appointed someone to the school board doing millions and millions of dollars with the school board in the city of Chicago. Conflict. Yeah. If we had an elected school board, we would not have closed down 50 schools within the minority community. We would have kept those schools open. It was this mayor first of all, we would put it to the public, how many schools need to be opened back up. If they decide that 100%, fine. If they decide 50%, fine. We would take those other schools, put trades in them, and open up businesses in those particular schools. Now, when the mayor closed those schools up, it was more than disenfranchising just the kids that go to school. He disenfranchised the school teacher that lost their job, the janitor that mopped the floor, the contracts out there, the landscape. He disrupted a lot of lives with that one decision, and that's wrong. I wouldn't stand for it. As your mayor, elect the school board, let the people make a decision for their own kids in the future.
Alderman, perhaps.
Thank you. First of all, I think everybody knows my position. It's been for years an elected school board. No questions asked. Moratorium on charter schools until we get our fiscal health in order. I wish charter schools would be better, but they're really down the lower end. They haven't shown the robust action that we would want to. And it's privatization and collateralizing our children, too. When we talk about social impact bonds, it was just passed by the city council, $17 million. CPS couldn't do it, but the city council did it to contract to a third party to allow Head Start. And those that got the bonds, $17 million, their return is $34 million. Not a bad deal. But who were the ones that invested? Goldman Sachs, Northern Trust, the Pritzker family. Again, collateralizing our children. You know, I wasn't going to testify, and I went to the, I don't know where everybody else was at, but I was at all those hearings. I testified in front of those administrative law judges. I testified at 5 that affected the people of the city of Chicago. I was at multiple hearings around the city for it. And at the 5 hearings that I testified, the 3 judges said that we should keep those schools open. When the time came for that board meeting, I was there, and in fact, I wasn't going to be there. 5 days before, I said I'm not going. 3 days before, I said I'm not going. And you can go on Fox and watch what I said that day, because I was pretty upset, and I got a standing ovation by everybody in that room that day. But what happened? I said it was a charade. That's why I wasn't going to testify. And we already knew what the decision was going to be. And so we need an elected school board, one that's representative of the diversity of what this city is and can help make the decisions. I'm not afraid of, I don't think big money can control those kind of elections, because if we do it right, we can set the standard and be the model across this country. You know, we're the only school district in the state that doesn't have an elected school board, so we need to have one. But we can set limits on what the campaign contributions are, do what needs to be done to make sure we have the people's voice and not corporate interest voice and not the charter school voice and not the big contributors that give to ROM who are advocates of the charter. And as the doctor said, the one person who benefits from it, who's a charter school advocate, who I called for her resignation as soon as it occurred. And it doesn't help that whatever profits you make, you're going to give them back to some charity. That's not, that doesn't wash. So, but how do we find the resources? I think everybody in this room ought to be really upset about what we did the last 12 years when we had a Democratic governor, Democratic Senate, Democratic House. Not a single damn thing got towards education. We could have changed the way we fund education in this state. We could have done what needed to be done for our children in terms of resources. But they didn't want to do it. I don't know, maybe it's a lack of will that just happens throughout everybody and throughout these things here. And if you're not upset about those years, you know, I'm glad we had reformers that got there and said they were going to vote against Mike Madigan when he got in there. Well, they haven't, you know, he went and he sailed into his place. All those promises, all those people that get elected, hold them accountable, period. So, thank you.
We have 102 counties in Illinois. 101 have a different funding formula. Most of that money comes from the state. The city of Chicago and the county of Cook, 60% of our property taxes go to fund education. And a lot of people who are older, who don't have children in school, or persons who have children in parochial schools or private schools, have withdrawn from the concept of public school education because it doesn't benefit them. So certainly we have to rethink the way the state of Illinois funds Chicago public schools, because the state has the primary responsibility to provide education for our children. We definitely need an elected school board, but as Bob indicated, we have to make certain that the election is not hijacked by special interest groups, by the unions, by big business, by charter schools, or any other entity that would do it for selfish reasons. So you have to have in place financing restrictions, campaign financing restrictions, and campaign financing limits. And until we get to that point where we're willing to do that, Chicago is not ready. I definitely favor an elected school board, and we'll fight for that. We'll have 8, excuse me, 8 single-member districts with a president chosen at large. We'll have, instead of a CEO of Chicago Public Schools, we'll have an education-first superintendent who's not committed to making big business rich, but is committed to educating our children. That's what's required in the city of Chicago. We'll make certain that our educational system in Chicago is responsive to both those parents who want charter schools and those parents who want just public schools, neighborhood schools, contract schools. We'll put a moratorium on the number of charter schools we can have in the city of Chicago, because it's an experiment. And as Bob indicated, that experiment hasn't necessarily proved to work. So we want to limit the potential damage. We've got time. Our children are growing. We have to have, working in cooperation with one another, the principals, the teachers, the parents, the local elected school councils. We have to have everybody on the same page if we're going to have quality education here in the city of Chicago. And there is no move intended to do that at this point. We want to make certain that our children are taught the things that they need to be taught and given the opportunity to exercise free will. We have to have educational intensive care. That means we have to evaluate a child at pre-K and determine what it's going to take for that child to get all the way through graduation in the 12th grade. It is not one size fits all. Educational intensive care will provide us information that we need to increase our graduation rate. We're forcing children out of school. We're dropping children out of school. And we have a huge dropout rate because we're forcing our children to go to school across gang lines. Gangs are a reality in Chicago. They have been since the early 1900s, when every alderman had a gang that they called a club. So we want to make certain that we're doing what we have to do to provide a superior public school education for each and every individual child.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to switch up a little bit, given time, and I'm going to ask if there's anyone in the audience who has a question that they would like to pose before we turn back. So I think I saw Eric's hand go up first.
I did too.
Eric, why don't you come up to the mic here? Do you folks need Eric to announce himself? You need his name, Eric? And you can certainly tell people. Oh, yeah, well.
Can I take this off? Yeah.
Yeah, a little short there for you, isn't it? There we go.
Hi, my name is Eric Gelman. I live in Uptown, and I teach history at Roosevelt University. Thank you all for being here. My question is, do you think that the growth of unions is essential to the future prosperity of Chicago? And if so, what specifically will you do to promote the growth of unionization in the city of Chicago, particularly in the service sector? Thanks.
I would encourage short answers to the point. Alderman, I think you're up.
Well, as I've repeatedly said, I think it's important that we do have unions. In the service sector, I think we have to make sure that we are looking at raising the wages across the board. You know, $13 an hour plus, I mean, you know, it's a start, but I've been an advocate of $15 an hour for quite a long time. And more importantly, especially companies that make over $50 million in revenue. And I think that lifts up everybody at that point. And when we look at Walmart that's invading our territories here, $4 billion in profits. That means $1 billion in profits. $1 billion in profits. I think we could look at ways, because we suffer, everybody in this room suffers when companies have low wages. And because they don't provide health care, they don't provide a lot of utilities. I mean, I think all of us have seen, and primarily there are women who are working 1, 2, 3 jobs at basic at the $8.25 an hour. And you know, there's no time to spend with your family, no time to educate your kids, no time to look out after your kids. I mean, we need to raise that so they can spend more time and spend money in their communities.
Thank you.
I certainly flavor unions. As I said earlier, I was a member of UAW at a very early age, and I know the impact that it had on my life. I had someone fighting for me and speaking for me. I certainly favor an increase in the minimum wage. I don't oppose $15 an hour. But you can promise people $100 an hour. If there are no jobs, it means absolutely nothing. So we have to have a sensible approach to raising the minimum wage to ensure that we don't damage the business that we have here. And there isn't enough discussion about that. Everybody's on board, yes, 15, 13. But we're not talking about how do we get there sensibly. Certainly you start with big box businesses and businesses that earn a certain amount of money, like the McDonald's. But you also have to be sensible, because people have options in this day and age. A lot of these businesses are transitory. They're not tied to Chicago. For example, when you start talking about the transaction tax, those people don't have to center their business here in Chicago. They don't have to initiate their trades here. So you have to be careful when you start talking about more fees and when you start talking in a blanket about an increase in the minimum wage. Yes, I favor the increase in the minimum wage, but it has to be done sensibly.
And Dr. Wilson, please, briefly.
I think this here is that with union, they have some good ideas, they got some bad ideas, right? As a business person. And what has happened is that you got global economy. Global economy, you got to deal with it. We're not like we used to be. We have to sit down and negotiate together. A lot of our major corporations don't come to Chicago and have convention here. They go to Florida, Las Vegas, and those places because the price is too high, you know, so they drive jobs and business away. We must sit down and talk and negotiate where it's sensible. Case in point, I did a concert. I'm a gospel singer as well. I did a concert in Chicago Theater. It's cost me $300,000 to do a concert for 2 days. The next year I didn't do it. I went to Tenant Park. It cost me $35,000. We had to take a guitar and put it at the door and drop it. Another person came and picked it up to take it to another place. Right? I'm not done business back at Chicago Theater. $200,000 versus $35,000 is a lot of money. Okay? So we have to come together and be reasonable and speak and talk. We deal with the global economy, and we can't just say we're a union and drive jobs out of different states. We have to be competitive. We have to be reasonable. You know, we all have to get together and say, look, let's do this thing together. The union shouldn't be all right. The business shouldn't be all right. But we come together and talk, then we all can work this thing out.
Thank you.
Yes, my question is for Dr. Wilson and the other two candidates on the stage. Dr. Wilson, your casino gambling proposal, I didn't hear your numbers in terms of revenue and the dollars that you would generate from that. And so that's my question to you. And to the other candidates, I would like just to know your position on casino gambling in Chicago. Thank you.
Dr. Wilson first, briefly.
Okay. I haven't did the research on in terms of casino gambling no more than I know that it is another revenue that is not within the city of Chicago. It's in other places. Here's what this does. If you bring it in Chicago, you create job contracts. You're bringing people from New York instead of going to New Jersey or Las Vegas. You're bringing people from international in Chicago that the hotels are now going to benefit from coming in, the taxes and things. People buy more food and things of that nature. And those jobs and those contracts, we need them to reflect all of our community. We also need them to reflect, to work on what the city owes its police department, its citizen work in terms of the pension thing. We got to get that down. If you work 35 years as a police officer came and told me the other night, he said, I don't have enough money to retire. 35 years. We got to do something about it. We got to start somewhere. That's just one beginning of it. That just the figures, it must be profitable because Las Vegas is making it, you know?
Thank you. Doc, why don't you take the question where you stand on?
Certainly. Typically, I don't favor casinos, primarily because many of the people that the advertisement is aimed at are people who would gamble, not for recreation, but in hopes of changing their life or just paying their bills. So when asked in the past, I suggested that if we have 2 casinos in Chicago, that they be situated beyond the gates, security gates at O'Hare Airport and Midway Airport. So they're aimed at travelers who can actually afford to gamble recreationally. It doesn't bother me that some people are able to drive to Indiana to gamble. If that's what they choose to do, that's their prerogative. But you have so many more people who don't have transportation and never think about going there. But if it's right next door to you, right down the street, you'll start gambling. And oftentimes when people gamble, they become addicted. We run commercials. Remember with the lottery, Bernie Mac, woo, woo, giving the impression everybody's winning. People jumping up out of their beds. Hey, if everybody's winning, I better go play the lottery. But they don't get the return on the investment. So I don't believe that you do that. If you do have a lottery, you should have an insurance policy that says that if a head of household goes out and gambles because you've encouraged them through your commercials and through your advertisement, that insurance will ensure that the family doesn't end up homeless in Chicago. You have to have protections in place if you're going to encourage people to engage in things like gambling.
Thank you. Alderman.
Well, first of all, I think somewhere I'm between both of the candidates. As I said in 2010, I did come out in favor of a casino, and every mayoral candidate jumped on it. And then the Chamber of Commerce said, we need it, it's going to be $600 million worth of income to the city, and I was scratching my head. And then, of course, we had the recession, and then nobody even had jobs. So I don't know, but the people that were making money were the casinos over in Hammond, Indiana. They were making it from our hard-earned money, our people who were retired. What's always interesting is that it's just not the folks at, and it's an interesting concept, let's have it around the airports, but gosh, come to some of these churches on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, and the buses are lined up to take them over to Hammond. Somehow all that preaching in the Bible just doesn't make a lot of sense. And if we have a casino, it has to be the highest of ethics. It has to be beyond reproach. There are places that we can put it, but it's way down at the last of the end. And there's a lot of different theories out there. Do we make something out here? Do we do video poker, which is another issue? So I think it's a very complex subject. I do favor it, but it's got to be highly regulated to make sure, as Doc was talking, that people don't get caught into the culture of this is the way we're going to make all of our big money. The individual, we know that just doesn't happen. So, thank you.
And we'll take another question. Make sure you say your name and where in the city you reside.
Well, my name is Clint Brown, and I'm working with the coalition right now to help to pass an ordinance in the city of Chicago that deal with earned sick pay days. And basically what we're looking at is New York and other cities have passed an ordinance where workers will have the right to be paid if they're sick, or just as recently the schools closed in the city of Chicago, where parents had to stay home with their children. And we know that a lot of workers right now, it states in the city of Chicago, is estimated at over 460,000 workers do not have any rights to paid sick days. So we know what happens is workers are hurting to pay their bills, so they will come to work sick, especially in the food industry. They'll pass those germs along, or they'll pass it on to their co-workers. So right now we're asking that if any of the candidates were the next mayor of the city of Chicago, would you be willing to work toward earned sick days and pass that ordinance for this world-class city and all the workers here?
Thank you. I think we're up to Doc. I think, Doc, you should lead us off here.
I love the concept, but it's not as simple as it sounds. One of the things that I favor is a 4-day, 10-hour-a-day work week, so that people have 3 days to spend with their family and spend pursuing those things. And then if you have flexibility in terms of those days, then you can kind of compensate for that, so you're paid for it. To suggest to private businesses that they have to provide people sick days is a little beyond the purview of the mayor of the city of Chicago.
I appreciate the brevity of the answer and to the point. Very good. Alderman.
Good. Could I make up for the rest of the time?
Yeah, take all of it.
Actually, thank you. I'm glad the president came out yesterday for it, earned sick days. And as you probably know, I did draft the ordinance in its entirety. I looked at every city. I've talked to all the, and the states. New Jersey, we had 6, 7 cities that have passed earned sick days. I think it's essential. I think at the press conference, yeah, I wasn't the main sponsor on it, but I did draft the ordinance, and we worked hand in hand to get that done. We should get that done. It is a priority when I am the mayor.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Wilson, briefly?
Sick days, here's my opinion. I think it had to be a limited amount of days that is there. I'm a business person. Some of my employees said they're sick, and they're at a baseball game. Right? My spouse worked for the city, and I get mad with her. Every day, she get 20 to 30 days off a year. those are passed down to the taxpayer by way of real estate taxes. We have to pay for it one way or another. You know, I have sisters, my own sisters and brothers, get out there and say they're sick, and I know they ain't sick because they're over my house. Right? So we have to look at it that way. I'm not so much in favor of sick days as way out of proportion. If you're sick, you're sick, right? But we all know we're gonna be at a baseball game somewhere. Let's be real about it. You know, those are things we encourage. And you don't pass that burden down onto a senior citizen who have a fixed income in terms of real estate tax that goes up as a result of hundreds of thousands of people for the city and state.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carly from WGN News. Mayor Emanuel recently announced an expansion in the CPS dual enrollment program with the help of funding from GE. What is your take on that, and how do you plan on boosting and motivating graduation rates beyond funding from big businesses?
Can you say the first part of that question again?
Sure. Mayor Emanuel recently announced an expansion in the CPS dual enrollment program with the help of GE. They're helping to fund it and hopes it grows so that kids can go on to college and hopefully afford it. So how do you plan on boosting or motivating the graduation rates beyond funding from the big businesses like GE?
Well, first of all, I think I started the conversation when I talked that income inequality is which is the issue across the board here. And I'm going to tell you, because you raised a question about education earlier. And the problem is income inequality in education. I had 40 schools. I've got a school that had about 350 pupils. They had a parents' night. They raised $117,000 that night. Okay? That was nice. But it was way on the east side. Go to the west side the following Friday. About 200 more students. Same kind of curriculum. Great principal. A great principal who left CPS because he was disgusted, and they did close the school down. They raised about $4,000 at a parent's night. You know, we have to find a way to have the resources and again, I voted against that social impact bond when we collateralize our children is wrong and use it to $17 million to give them $34 million to the profit off of it. Absolutely wrong. But we need to find ways to have early enrollment. And then we go all the way to, that's why, and I said in '06 two things. Not everybody should go to college, and not everybody should own a home. But the opportunity should be there for everybody to go to college and own a home. I received a number of my hours in this, and I'm proud of the fact of one of the top high schools in this country. The number 2 person came here, okay? When I looked at him, I talked to him because he could have gone anywhere in the country. The kid could have. Top 100 he was, out of Jones, and Jones has fluctuated out of the top 100 more often than Whitney Young. Now I say that, I think there are ways to find costs to help kids. Don't forget, if we reinstate trade and vocational schools in our high schools, I think that's a start because people can use their hands. At the same time, I've used that one school, remember that school that only raised a few $1,000s from a parents' night? I had American Girl help that school funding. I had a taxi cab company help that school. I had I had law firms that gave big dollars and cents to all of the schools. You know, we can get corporate involvement, but not corporate takeover of our schools. And that's the difference, and that's what we got to fight for.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson, and then we'll end this question with Dr. Walz, please.
When you say that Mayor Emanuel made a proposal, I have to say this, that people always say everything that glitters is not gold, right? Why is he doing it 2 or 3 months before election? Why didn't he do it 4 years ago, right? This man is a fake, right? Don't tell me that you're gonna work on these things 2 or 3 months before election and didn't do it 4 years ago. Be real. Don't take and look like you're going to do something. I'm for education. I only get a 7th grade education. But you gotta understand this too. Education doesn't make a person. Character will make a person. Then you do that. Character will follow and lead to education, treating people right. Half our country is uneducated. We got good people. If I was coming to get some of you off a job right now, and I said I got a 7th grade education, I pick cotton, chop cotton, you'll find me and you'll say, get out of here, okay? But thank the Lord that Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, said, I'm going to give you this store an opportunity. As a result of that today, we're able to create a $60 million company, right? So you don't push away or condemn people because of education, but make sure the doors are open and look at the character and move that way.
Doc, please.
I certainly favor dual enrollment programs. One thing I notice is that a lot of these high school students are on a fast track. Many of them graduate in 3 years. My daughter went to Jones Academic Magnet High School. They were partnered with Roosevelt University, so they were able to go over there and use their facilities and take classes there. And as a result, they had a head start when they went to college. I think that, one, that's a carrot because it motivates them to continue on. Once they get into the college environment, they realize that they can function and perform at that level, and they have the confidence that they need to move on without missing a beat. Confidence sells. So I certainly favor that program.
Thank you. All right, we have time for this one last question and then some brief responses.
I was in last, so I'm disabled, so I can't stay.
Oh, all right, well then we'll make time for you then. We'll do it even more.
It's a quick question, I
will say
promise.
yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
I just want one from each candidate. My name is Christian Nuno. I'm a student here at UIC. I come from a family of small business owners. I just want to know how each of you, what your plan is to support small business owners in Chicago.
Give it your best shot as briefly as you can.
As I said earlier today, I think we should look at tax relief for certain small businesses, create tax-free zones. But when I did vote for the increase on the minimum wage, and even though, as I said earlier, it wasn't enough, I said we got to sit down with small businesses. And I said the real hard work, and I looked to the chairman of that committee, begins today, because not every small business has those big numbers that we can help. And I think I've had since we passed that ordinance in December, I've had over 14 meetings dealing with small businesses, what we can incorporate, how to assist them at this point, and what we need to do to go further. I think it's really important because the small businesses are the backbone of this city.
Thank you. Thank you. Alderman? Doc?
I mentioned earlier my capital improvement program, the intent to give small businesses a $1 million loan with scrutiny. But additionally, one of the things that we have to do is recognize that many small businesses get their start from city contracts and contracts from the sister city agencies, et cetera. So what I'd like to do is unbundle the contracts and make them smaller. I'd like to provide wrap-up bonding and insurance, which is really important to businesses that don't have an extensive history, emerging businesses. I'd like to allow them to lease equipment rather than require that they own that equipment. And eventually, what I'd like to have is a access to capital loan for those businesses so that they can pay for their lease equipment and pay their employees for the first several weeks. That will encourage more small businesses to engage in the process and ensure their success. That's beneficial to the people of the city of Chicago because now you have more people who are bidding, excuse me, and consequently prices come down. So it's beneficial to the people of the city of Chicago.
Dr. Wilson.
Small business. I want to make sure that we introduce legislation that would say every business company, major corporation, that does business with the city of Chicago must have an equal opportunity as related to job and contracts to make sure that those small businesses could get into their own businesses. I've also set up an economic development fund through the city itself to make sure that those small businesses will be able to have resources for taxes out of their tax dollars to get started into business. I'll make sure that they got the money set aside that they can get the bonds and things that they need to get to be in business. You can be a small business, but you don't have the money, the capital. But it is your money. It's your taxpayers' dollars. Nobody should come over here and take your taxpayer dollars and say you're not good enough because you don't have money, but yet they gave your money to a major corporation. You have to have even playing field to make sure you can get in business. That's what I would do for small business. I would make sure that your taxpayer dollar, that you can come and do business with the city of Chicago. Make sure that you can get the money from the bank or get the money from the city and have a safety net. So if you happen to go wrong with something like that, put a mentor program in place that makes sure you're successful in business, that those neighborhoods will have economic empowerment for all citizens of the city of Chicago.
Thank you. And then we'll allow this, our last questioner.
My name is Will Crosby. I'm with a group called Improve. We are advocates of the disabled. And my question is this. Government has many contracts. One particularly is the public transportation that deals with paralegal. I mean, it's going to be paratransit. The city of Chicago used to control the paratransit program. For you who don't know, now the suburban mayors control the Chicago paratransit programs. Our group is advocating the control of disabled services by disabled people, and in fact, getting disabled people out of poverty. How will your administration help the disabled to take over contracts so that the people who are disabled, programs that we created, like paratransit programs that we created, that able-bodied people make all the money on, not one contract is going to a disabled person?
Thank you. Doc, why don't you lead us off on that?
Okay. Real quickly, CHA has a program. It's called Section 3, and it's intended to ensure that the residents of Chicago housing are involved in the contracting process. We need similar programs for special interest groups like those persons who are disabled, who are the backbone of organizations like PACE. Without them, PACE would not exist. But PACE also has to be a good neighbor, and it has to be intent on making certain that the persons who support them primarily are involved in the process. So I would certainly favor making certain that we have requirements and conditions in place to ensure that the disabled are able to get contracts, have preferential treatment when it comes to contracting with the agency that they primarily support.
Dr. Wilson, quickly.
Well, we will make sure that there's equal opportunity for all citizens. Disabled, if you need special program for it, we'll make sure that happens. Nobody will be left behind. We will make sure that we brand our city, international as well as national. We brand our city about how we treat our citizens. That's what I would do.
Thank you. And Alderman.
Thank you. And I do agree with both candidates. It's unfortunate, though, it's just not on the paratransit and what we've done. I think we've eliminated so much. I think we need to put a real push toward, and I've said it repeatedly in City Council, to giving those that are disabled more contracts. You know, the federal act is governing. We should be having more at the airports, especially exclusion there. We should be looking at the law. We should be having opening it up. I've named the one area over by Plymouth and Van Buren for Disability Pride as parade starts there, and it's one of the few honorary signs that I believe in. We need to do more. I've made sure at transit stops and anywhere that I can have an impact that we are ADA friendly across the board, not just in terms of movement, but in terms of contracts too across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we are right up against our limit here, and so I want to have a big hand for the candidates who made a conscious choice to be with you today. I want to thank the panelists for their time and their questions.